Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominick and Bryan.
This is the second part of a two-part series that Bryan and I are doing on pornography because, as it turns out, you can't fit everything porn into just one episode. Now, in the first episode, we started with your very first moment discovering porn and all of the events that followed leading up into this point in time today. This episode is all about what happens going forward. What is your relationship like with pornography into the future? And this entire conversation is wrapped inside of the 5 stages that Bryan and I have outlined that men go on with their lifelong journey with respect to porn. Now, in the first episode, we went through the first 3 stages: discovering, downloading, and drifting. And 95% of men will never get past that 3rd stage of drift, where you are engaging with porn unconsciously, not understanding how it's affecting your life energy or the drive that you bring to have sex in your relationships and to be creative there. And what we want to talk about is disrupting that so that you can take true command of your relationship with pornography, or maybe deciding not to ever use pornography ever again, for your life going forward. So this next hour is really all about how do you take command and the final 2 stages of the 5 stages of your relationship with porn. All right, Bryan, here we are on part number 2 of the 5-stage journey that most men go through when it comes to their experience with porn.
Goodness, I mean, porn, it's apparently a large topic, which we need 5 stages and at least 2 episodes. We probably have 102 episodes.
Right.
But luckily, we've really condensed things down to 2.
Yeah, well, so let's revisit what we went over in the first one.
Great.
Which was the first 3 stages, and these all begin with the letter D, just to make it easy to remember. The first stage that most boys will say go through, because boys discover porn at an early age, the first stage is discovering. And discovering is really about the entry point with which you discover pornography. When, I'm 39 years old right now. When I discovered porn, it was through a Playboy magazine, 2-dimensional analog experience. Max Stossel, the one who you heard do his poem, he's 29 years old right now. He discovered porn online with semi-high-speed internet. So he had like 10-second video clips. And kids today are accessing like 5G Wi-Fi speeds on their iPhones, iPads, parents, sisters, brothers, whatever. Their entry point is like deep pornography.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I had to hide my magazine in my closet, under my bed, right? The classic places you hide it. Now people have to hide their VR goggles. I mean, that's the difference in the type of porn we're consuming these days.
Bingo. And so you might imagine that the experience of kids absorbing porn today, they're growing up a lot more quickly in not the best of ways, right? So that's their entry point is very different than our entry point was. The second stage is the downloading stage. So this is like, the figurative sense of downloading. You're not downloading the porn in a literal sense, even though you might be. The downloading is like, what is the worldview that you're shaping? What are you learning about what the size of your dick should be, or how aggressive you should be, or how long you should last, or how assertive and what positions and what a man is supposed to be? This is the worldview, the belief systems that then become the foundation for what you expect inside of your relationships, and also the expectations of how a woman is supposed to respond and act, and how much pleasure she's supposed to be experiencing, and the feedback that she's supposed to be giving you as you're going through.
And all stems from the fact that we don't understand, especially at a young age, that porn isn't reality.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It is a very, very tiny subset of what sex could look like. But when you are a child absorbing porn, or even as an adult absorbing porn, and you're not probably watching a lot of other people having sex in your real life, the only sex you witness is your own, and then porn, that becomes like, I guess, your basis or your reality point for what else could be out there. So this 3rd stage that we covered in the first episode about this was the drifting stage. And drift is this hypnotic rhythm of unawareness, right? It's like your patterns and your habits just take over your diving into porn without much of an understanding as to why. You don't know why you like the porn that you like. A key characteristic of drift is escalation around your porn habits. So maybe you're watching it more often, or the thing that was really arousing to you a year ago is just boring to you now, and you now have to escalate to another level. Maybe sex with your partner has become increasingly boring or mundane, or it doesn't feel as good because like the stuff that you're witnessing when you're watching porn is far more intoxicating. It hits like more of your neurochemicals, and therefore drift has really kind of taken over your life, and you're not necessarily aware of it. And also potentially saying, I want to stop watching porn as much, making a commitment to yourself, and then stepping over that time and time.
And this drifting stage, I mean, I described my entry into, let's say, porn at the age of, let's call it 14, and being essentially in drift, which can happen very quickly, until maybe I was 35.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is where most men, probably unaware of, spend the majority of their life.
Yeah, for the rest of their lives. And like I said in the last episode, when I spent 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous, about half the men, half the new people who came into the rooms were addicted to porn. They weren't there because they were, addicted to prostitutes or philandering, or they knew that they had a problem with porn. They were watching it like 20 times a day. It was affecting their work behaviors. And so these are some of the more extreme examples, but these guys were drifting. They couldn't stop. Every promise they made to themselves, they just kept stepping over it and couldn't seem to get a handle on it. For people who don't have the quote unquote addiction, things like that may happen, just may happen much more slowly. Like you were saying, it could have happened for you over the course of 2 decades of your life. You're on the same trajectory, maybe as some of these, like some of the people who ended up in Sex Addicts Anonymous. It just happened much more slow. It's happening more slowly, and maybe not even to your conscious detection.
Right.
Okay. So before we even get into stages 4 and 5, it's important to reiterate that what we are not talking about here is porn shaming, right? Like both you and I watch porn now. We watch it very differently than we did probably for the first 2 decades.
Also separately. We watch it separately. Yeah, we haven't had the group experience of porn yet.
Which I'd be interested in. I wouldn't be interested in exploring and watching.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we're gonna do that.
yeah. We found our line. That's good.
Yeah.
We talked about it.
Good.
Okay.
Good. I feel better about this. We're not porn shaming here, because I do think that what most conversations I see around pornography, people who have woken up from their drift, is that they get so angry at some of the things that Max had shared in his poem, so angry about how it's affected our worldview, or the shame that we feel about ourselves, or how it's caused us problems in our sex lives, that we go the opposite end of the spectrum, which is saying porn is awful, it's evil, and then we create a series of judgments around it, which I think contributes to the shame spiral. But it also, for people who don't have a problem necessarily with porn, who are just looking to create more consciousness and awareness, yelling at you for watching porn and saying it's bad and wrong doesn't help the conversation either. So what you and I are looking at doing is just having a much more nuanced conversation around what role does porn play in your life.
Great. Let's get into it.
Okay. Stage number 4, and this is the place that if you can arrive at, if you can break free from drift and elevate to this next stage, it's a gateway to having better sex. It's a gateway to feeling more connected with yourself and reducing guilt and shame. This 4th stage is the disrupting stage. The way out of drift is to disrupt this hypnotic rhythm, to disrupt these habits and patterns that run your life, especially when it comes to porn. There's 2 forms of disruption, and I'm going to get into some real stories here in a second: intentional disruptions and unintentional disruptions. Most people wake up from their drift from an unintentional disruption. One that I had a chance to witness was simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. This is probably like 12 or 13 years ago. I was staying at a hotel down in Philadelphia. I can't even remember what for. I'd gotten off the elevator. I was walking towards the end of the hallway, which was where my room was, and I could hear this woman screaming at the top of her lungs. Like as soon as I got off the elevator, screaming at the top of her lungs at, I think it was her husband. And she was screaming at him because she had just done what most men fear to their core. She had discovered his secret porn stash on his computer.
Oy.
Yeah.
And probably hadn't had a conversation with her prior to that.
There was no way that
his
they
porn
had a
habits.
conversation. Yeah.
Right.
The way that she had, like, this was like a DEFCON 5 nuclear explosion. And some of the things that she was saying were how could you watch this disgusting stuff? Is this what you think a real woman looks like? If this is what a real woman looks like, then how could you be attracted to me? Say something for yourself. And then he would try and say something, and she'd be like, shut the fuck up, and like override him. And like he was just beaten to the submission. I could hear in his voice that every time he tried to speak up, like there was a broken man. She was incensed because I could tell that she was hurt for any number of reasons. Maybe that like he was keeping a secret. I have no idea what he was watching. I had no indication of was what he was watching, mainstream or whatever. It doesn't even matter. But like she had some element of that there was a betrayal. She felt ugly in some regard because I heard her mention a couple of times, like, if this is what you find attractive, then how could I ever be attractive to you? How long have you been watching it? Apparently she found like a treasure trove of this stuff because it's like she referenced how much of it was there on the computer. And the guy couldn't defend himself. Like every time he tried to string together a sentence or two, it was incoherent. She would jump in.
I mean, could you imagine too, at that point in time, like everything that's flooding through this guy's brain right now, his body at that point. I mean, it is scared for the relationship and maybe even kids. It is
life or death, man.
Yeah, you are in fight or flight mode, mostly probably in flight.
Totally. Yeah. Think about this. I don't know how long they were married. It did sound like they were married because they were together for a long time. I don't know if they had kids or not. But like in that moment, this man, the discovery, like her discovery, her disrupting moment, put everything about his current life and his future life totally at risk. And I think this is one of the primary reasons why people get stuck in drift, because it's like, I don't want to talk about this with my partner. I want to go over here and have my own little moment in the corner in this deep, dark world that maybe on some level I'm ashamed of. And it doesn't need to be deep or dark, but this is kind of what it's made it out to be because of the fear of reactions like that. And again, like I can't necessarily fault her for reacting the way that she did, because on some level there may be a betrayal. On some level there is an insecurity or deep amounts of insecurity that she just experienced. But this was honestly a moment where the disruption does call into question all of these patterns. The problem with this unintentional disruption is there was no way I could see, at least in the short term, that led to any form of an evolved outcome for either of them. She was horrified. He was guilt or shamed around it. And the next step after that, and I can, you can play these out. The story can turn out in a million different ways. But like the way that I perceived that story turning out was this man caught tail between his legs, makes a commitment to himself. That's never going to happen again. He's never going to get caught again. Maybe he's scared enough where he's never going to look at porn again, or maybe he's going to buy a new device and keep it hidden from his partner, and then go and get his jollies the way that he has been for years, and then hope that his wife never discovers it again. Maybe they break up. But it didn't sound like in that moment that there was any basis for them to elevate or have like a conversation that allowed them to understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think about looking back at my own life in terms of like, well, how do you get to a place where you're in a hotel room and your wife is absolutely screaming at you and belittling you for what you watch in porn?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I could easily see that happening.
Yeah, totally.
Because we grow up with very little education as far as self-pleasure goes, no education when it comes to porn. And so what do we opt to do? We opt to do that by ourselves, not talk about it in places and have stashes in places where people aren't going to find you. Maybe it's in the shower, but we're doing it by ourselves. And then as we start to figure out what is our sexuality and how do we connect and have sex with another human being, the last thing you're going to be talking about at that moment is, by the way, like, let me tell you about all the things that I've been doing, under the covers, and all the things I've been doing with a shame attached to it. Yeah. And so you go through drift for years and years and years and years, and all of a sudden, boom, disruption.
Yeah.
That is a scary place to be.
It is. And the unintentional, right? So this is the unintentional part of disruption. So it's like being discovered or something like this. Again, Sex Addicts Anonymous, like that I've talked about a few times, like guys end up in Sex Addicts Anonymous for many reasons, and oftentimes it's because they've been caught. They've been caught with porn by their partner. They've been caught masturbating to porn when they've told their partner that they were not going to, or they were like, I've made so many commitments to stop watching this kind of porn or this many times, and I cannot. And I realize that I can't help myself. I need to go find help. These are moments where disruption needs to take place in order to break free from drift.
And Dom, just before we go further on that, one thing I want to understand better about this story.
Sure.
The opportunity here with disruption, in this case, unintentional disruption, is either one path is towards a understanding and a communication.
That's right.
Or the other path is I'm going to go buy an iPad that she'll never see and continue doing the behavior that is unacceptable in her eyes. And maybe I'm a little more conscious that she doesn't approve of it, but I'm not really elevated in that situation. Is that
good point? So the unintentional disruption can be a springboard for having like deeper, more intimate conversations that allow you to express your desires and get to know something about yourself or the other person that you're with. Because this unintentional disruption may not happen with a partner. Like if for someone who's single, who's listening, I was single, like when I went through all my stuff, an unintentional disruption could be, again, like you making a commitment to yourself and then just trampling on that commitment over and over again. The other way that an unintentional disruption could go, it could go into a deeper series of shame and secrecy, right? And so that is like, oh, fuck, I just got caught this time. I never want to be caught again. And so I'm going to cover my tracks even more. And I have no evidence to support this other than anecdotal evidence. I think that the latter happens more often where people go deeper into secrecy. Right. Versus elevating in the boundary.
Even at a young age, my dad found a magazine in my closet. So we didn't have a discussion at that point of, it was unintentionally disrupted in that case, and definitely interrupted in that case. It wasn't a conversation in terms of like, well, this is what women are, this is what porn is. It was like, hey, knock that off.
Yeah.
Right. So what did I do? I found another magazine and I hid it in my tree fort.
Yeah.
So I literally just hid it better. I buried it deeper.
Yes.
Right.
And so here's the thing. It's like those disrupting moments when you just go hide things more or you dive deeper into secrecy, what you're doing is you're actually deepening your state of drift. Yes. Right? Because like the disruption is meant to wake you up to a pattern that is limiting, to wake you up to something that's like not serving you. And the secrecy, like with the guy that we're talking about right now, was not serving him or his wife. And yet I have no idea how the story played out. But like if he goes and hides things more, then you're just deepening the level of drift, and the communication between the two of them does not enhance.
Right. And the connection doesn't enhance, which ultimately is what she was probably pissed about.
Yeah, in the first place, right? Now, a great example of how an unintentional disruption turned into something that was like an up level. One of our Discerning Dick events, there was a woman by name of Lila, right? So Horizontal with Lila is her podcast. She talks about all things sex related. She lives in a sex positive community at the Hacienda in Brooklyn. And she said that when she was a child, she discovered some it was like smutty porn. That was, I think, what she talked about. It was like these stories that were written that were really graphic novels. And they were, intense, I guess you could say. And she found it when she was like 7 or 8 years old. And then she hid it in her hamper. And her mom does all the laundry. So her mom finds the smut and she confronted Lila. And the mom said to Lila, listen, sex is a beautiful thing. It's something that happens between two people who are maybe sometimes in love, maybe sometimes not. It's a natural thing. And actually it created like kind of one of those first birds and bee moments. And the mom was like, but this, what you're reading, is not okay for you at this age. And it was like this beautiful intervention that Lila said, that it was like this moment where my mom taught me something about the beauty of sex. Like I've never had that kind of shame around sex or sexuality, but I learned some healthy boundaries around what was cool for me or not. And that her mother gave her that gift. So that's like one way that a disruption can create an elevation around sex versus like the downgrade.
I love that. I've heard a similar story, and this gets a little bit into the education side of things. But since we're talking about porn, and we're usually pretty young when we find it, I think it's worth the conversation. I was talking to one mom, and what she decided to do is she's like, I know that my son has access to the internet, and I know he has friends that have access to the internet, and at some point in time, they're going to come across what Max came across for his poem. And so what she did, didn't want to make him feel awkward in having that kind of conversation with mom. But what she did is she actually found some porn like what you and I grew up on, the analog 2D flat porn, and cut out some things that showed women in a beautiful state, in a state of reality, but was still sexy enough and different for even a young boy at this point in time. Literally just put that on his bed, with a note that said, this is something that you might find interesting. There's a lot of other stuff out there that's not real, but these are real. I'm open to a conversation when you want to talk about it.
Wow. So that is a great example of like a disruption that comes from like an unintentional disruption, right, to a boy. But it's almost like, here's another perspective of the way the world could look. Here's how women could be portrayed, because chances are if you're on Pornhub or Bang Bros, you're not seeing this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So an example of an intentional disruption, and really like what we desire for everyone who's listening to this, is to curate these states of intentional disruption, because it means like the command is coming from within. You don't have to wait to be discovered for something to change your life. I took 4 years off of pornography. I suppose the irony is the reason why I did that is because of an unintentional disruption to my life, where I had to enter Sex Addicts Anonymous for 4 years in order to save a relationship with a woman that I loved. And one of the protocols, the key protocols in Sex Addicts Anonymous, is you just stop porn cold. Abstinence indefinitely, like basically for the rest of your life. I guess it's borrowed from like the 12-step programs of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Sex is much more nuanced because it's not like a substance that you're putting in your body. It's a behavior, right? But the way that they treat it, it's almost like you're putting a substance in your body. So alcoholics, stop drinking. Drug addicts, stop taking their drugs. And then sex addicts, stop watching porn. For me, I took 4 years off of porn. It was like January of 2013 to mid 2017 off of porn. That was surprisingly, for 4 years, Brian, like easy for me. At the same time, I took off 4 years from masturbation. That was a day in and day out struggle.
No, I feel like those go hand in hand, no pun intended.
You're not watching porn if you're not going to masturbate.
Right.
Like that.
In
that's
most
just
cases, I think that's very true.
Right? But for me, and we'll go into this in much more detail in another conversation around masturbation, but masturbation was the thing that I curated at a very early age as like a salve for any kind of anxiety, stress, whatever like internal chaos I was feeling. And I didn't have access as a 12 or 13-year-old to the kind of porn that like Max did, right? So my masturbation came from like fantasy in my mind and maybe like a Victoria's Secret catalog, right? So when I gave up porn, it hadn't been anchored so deeply. For 4 years, it was fairly easy. So that was the impetus for it. What did I learn from being off of porn for 4 years? I was in a relationship at the time. And what was amazing for me is within like 2 weeks of being off of porn, all of my sensitivities started coming back. What does that mean? It means that like when I was with my partner, she just became immediately more arousing to me because I wasn't desensitized to seeing thousands of different women in thousands of different scenarios within like, short periods of time online. It was just like this beautiful human being, this beautiful female body that was there that had no other distractions. And when I could get close to her, I could smell her hair and I could actually feel my body changing when I could smell how sweet her hair was. I could taste her skin when my lips touched her neck and how that tasted differently than like her inner thigh. And I could feel how that resonated in my body. When I touched her body, like my fingertips seemed to have more sensations. That sent electricity through my body. When she touched me, I felt her in a different way where after watching so much porn, my body was like numbed out. And that stuff started to come back. The sex that I had with her was far more connected. And I found myself, and this is something I didn't realize a lot of guys experience, but like I used to have to pull in, when I was having sex with her, I used to have to pull in like these pornographic images or movies that I had been watching to either keep me hard, to come at a time when I needed to come, because it was the thing that like, I don't know, it was almost like fueling my tank. And I needed those crutches because porn had desensitized me. But when I was with her off of porn, I could just be with her.
It sounds like in every way, whether it's in a sensual moment or not, that you are in this situation when you're off porn, you were more connected with her.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean,
and me, like connected with her, and I could feel things and even like see where they reverberated in my body. And Brian, this happened within like the first 2 weeks. It was that fast for me. We had a guy who spoke up at one of our Discerning Dick events who said that he took off, I think it was like a month of porn. And in the first 10 days, His experience was much more difficult. It was literally like going through withdrawal. He was like, I had migraines. I suffered from depression. Not clinical depression, but that was the word he used, like down moods.
Sadness, right?
Sadness, like lack of motivation. And he was like, oh, I had no idea the depths with which I depended upon this. If you want to take away an action from listening to this podcast, an intentional disruption could be take 10 days, take a month off of porn, see what happens. Because one of the things that...
and Dom, quick question on you. I know the topic's porn that we're talking about, but these, again, porn and masturbation go so hand in hand. So is the intentional disruption here like just take off of porn, or do you think they go together, masturbation and porn?
They're two separate things. So you have to make those decisions independently. Start with porn, and if you want to go for it, do porn and do a temporary abstinence from masturbation at the same time.
But your 4-year experience was both, was no porn,
both.
no masturbation.
Now this was really rough, Brian, like to do both, because here were the ways that I used masturbation. And porn was kind of a facilitator to masturbate, right? Masturbation for me was really about modulating my emotions. If I was stressed out, if I was tackling a complex problem or a situation on my computer at home and I didn't know like the first step, there was like all this inner chaos, and I would use masturbation to calm and quiet. And I thought it was like a great way for me to settle my nerves, but I didn't realize that my sex energy, this energy that I feel inside of me, is a potent life force. God, I know we're getting into like so many tangents, but it's important to bring this in. In the 4 years that I was off of pornography and masturbation, that was the time where I actually questioned the 13 years I had spent in corporate, is where I had the boldness to say, I'm actually going to move on and start my own business. The energy that I stopped spewing out into the world through like 3 or 4 times of masturbation a day turned into me creating, right? Me creating books or like a newsletter or creating like the future of my business, to have the boldness to step into that, or to even create the energy to go out and work out and like look the best that I ever have. Once I learned how to channel that energy in a different way, my whole life changed. Yeah. My entire life changed. But I didn't have anyone really guiding me, because what Sex Addicts Anonymous teaches you is just to stop. And a lot of that energy felt like I was a shook up bottle of Coca-Cola sometimes without anywhere to take the lid off. And so sometimes I found myself like having wet dreams, which were actually a welcome, you know. By the end of my 3 years, and I don't know if this is too much information, I could actually orgasm without touching myself. Like I could call up a fantasy, get hard, and without touching myself, like I could actually bring myself by like navigating through that fantasy, I could actually orgasm through that.
I don't think it's an overshare, but I'm completely shocked.
Yeah, so was I.
Interesting.
What happened. Yeah, I figured if I could do it when I was like sleeping.
Now, during this time period, are you connecting with women and having sex, or is it none of that either?
I didn't have a ton of sex during that 4-year period. There was an 11-month period where I was completely abstinent. So think about this.
So this is no masturbation, no porn, no sex, no handies, no
blowies,
even look at my penis. No nothing.
No.
Goodness.
Although there were 2 moments in that 11-month period where I was with women where there was like romantic stuff happening. Both of those ended in premature ejaculation.
Well, I think the analogy of shaking out bottle then is a pretty good one, Dom.
Yeah. This one woman who I'd been out like 4 or 5 dates with, she was recently divorced, beautiful Persian woman. Like she was just, every box was checked in terms of like what my chemistry just responds to. We'd gone out on 4 or 5 dates. She was just getting out of a marriage. So like it took a while for us to go back to her place. And we were lying on her floor. We were overlooking the New York City skyline. She's this beautiful place. And our bodies weren't touching, thank God. I was so fired up. We were kissing, and finally, like, her top starts to, like, she unbuttons her top, and one breast pops out. I touch her breast, and I explode in my pants. And this never happened to me before, but, like, I exploded in my pants, and like I said, like, our bodies weren't touching, so I was like, oh, shit, what do I do here? And I looked at her, and I was like, you know what? I think it'd be great if we stopped right now. I think we've gone far enough for tonight. I'm going to say goodbye and tuck my shirt like as this is happening and kind of like cover the wet spot.
Another topic for discerning dick, performance excuses.
And she, you know what? She was like, oh my God. She's like, you're so sweet. Like, you know, thank you. Thank you for taking it slow. I'm like, I know, I'm evolved. So I left. And I was so embarrassed because that's kind of what I was going through. But that's neither here nor there. So I'm going to rein this back.
Well, I think that's the extreme. And I think it's good for everybody here listening, like understanding that is the extreme side of things. And you're doing that for a very clear reason.
Yeah.
Because I think that if we were to ignore the performance aspects, I know a lot of guys, myself included, it's all don't go out with a loaded gun.
Oh, right.
Right. So I think let's get back to porn and masturbation together.
Yes.
Because I think what we could talk about is you could actually do the masturbation thing without the porn. Yes. And what do you revert back to, right? Is it past experiences? Is it future experiences? Is it maybe even some self-care, self-love? Yeah. But I think that's a topic for another day.
If you really want to get the most out of the experiment, I would say give up porn and masturbation for like 10 days, 14 days, right? First of all, realize how hard that is. Even as you're listening, how difficult this is.
Boom.
Even as you're listening to this.
That was the first dick pun that we've had in this episode.
So difficult. It's like so challenging to not jump on these, whatever. Even start to pay attention to like the resistance you may be experiencing right now to taking 10 days off of porn and masturbation. And when you see like the resistance that you experience, just even contemplating that, you can realize like how deeply ingrained it is into your ecosystem, like your natural evolution. And that could be like a trigger for drift.
Let's do a quick experiment right now.
Yeah.
How I'm feeling about 10 days without porn and masturbation. I feel excited.
Okay.
Because I like the idea of electricity in my fingertips.
Okay.
Like you described.
Yeah.
And if real world sex can be even better without it, I'm excited about it. So diagnose me, am I on the right path or not?
I don't think the diagnosis has anything to do with whether or not you're excited. Because like if you could be just as much scared, you could think this is awful. As long as like you're interested in learning about the feedback that an experiment like that is going to provide, then that's what I'm looking for.
Got it.
Yeah. So anyone who's listening, you do not need to wait until you're excited for it, because that chances are for 95% of you that excitement is never going to come.
Boom. That was pun two. Yeah, you nailed it.
These are happening fast and
furious.
furious.
I'm just keeping a tally.
Okay. We could play like dick pun bingo.
Yes.
And we'll have giveaways. Okay. So do not wait until you get so excited for it, because that's never going to happen. But what you are looking for, what you're seeking, is to break free from drift. This is all about an intentional disruption exercise. That means you're taking back command. Once you start taking back command, you learn about yourself. You have better sex. You become a better partner. You become more desirable by women and men, who, like whatever tickles your fancy. And so like that's what we're looking at calibrating. So I would say, man, if you're interested in taking on the challenge, then commit to it right now. So
that's the example of the intentional disruption of me sitting here and saying, you know what? I feel like there might be some value in this. I'm going to try something different, and literally changing topics, or not changing topics, but changing tactics.
Changing tactics.
Yeah. And I think if I could, for an intentional disruption, I think can also be through conversation. And I look at the story you told about the man and his wife in the hotel room. Yeah. And I look at, well, maybe an intentional disruption is, hey, honey, I'd like to sit down and talk about this thing that I'm doing. Or what are you interested in? Do you watch porn? And what I've found very much in my experience, whether it's in the sexual health space or in these types of discussions, is when those conversations are intentional and come from a place of empowerment and curiosity, and true curiosity, not judgment, that becomes a great catalyst for disruption.
Yeah.
And also getting into making better decisions going forward.
Totally.
So I think it's probably another simpler, maybe not simpler, maybe even harder example, but an intentional disruption nonetheless.
Yes. And if you've never had a conversation with your partner about anything sexually oriented or around this kind of stuff, then what that could easily turn into is something where maybe you're bringing an agenda. It's like, oh, I'm opening this conversation with my partner around like sex and sexuality and pornography because maybe I want to spice up our life. I want to have more kink. I want to introduce a threesome. She will feel that, dude, right? Like she will feel that you're bringing an agenda, will not feel safe, and will shut down to that. What we found with a lot of guys also in their hesitation to bring this conversation up to the women is, what if my woman is into something that threatens me? We had our men's group here maybe a year ago, like 12 men, probably 75% of them were married or in long-term relationships. And John O'Connor, who is one of the facilitators, he's this great coach, guidingtheshift.com. John does a lot of men's work. He's been married for 8 or 9 years. John asked the men in the room, guys, like, do you know what your women's desires are sexually? And the first, like, their knee-jerk reaction was like, yeah, of course.
Of course I do.
And then he goes, do you really? And they're all like, no, because they haven't asked, because they're afraid of, what if it's something that I can't satisfy? What if it's something that I might find repelling and I don't like about her? And so to have that disruptive conversation, really do an internal inventory first to find, like, are you clean? Are you in a place where you're ready to have that conversation? If the answer is no, then start with a trusted confidant first. Do a little test off Broadway, find out what shit may come up for you. Unless you feel really, really confident about having those conversations with your partner where there's a baseline of trust, don't just dive right into it, because it could create a little bit more chaos, I would say, than you're looking to introduce.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you go in, no agenda, ego checked at the door, then it could be a great connecting conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, with an idea of like, here's what I want to hear and not hear, that's trouble. Because now you're setting expectation.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time, man, on this disruption stage, because it's, again, like a place that most men will never get to, right? The drifting stage is really where most guys will spend the rest of their lives. So the disruptions, what we want for you is to create those intentional ones. The fifth and final stage, and I just let this word slip, but it's also the title of our podcast, is the discerning stage.
If the fifth stage wasn't discerning, I'd be pissed off, Dom.
We'd have a problem.
Yeah. I feel like this makes a lot of sense.
Your anger would be justified. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The fifth stage, discernment. What is this about? It's about understanding why, in this particular context, porn has a place or does not have a place in your life from a conscious, intentional standpoint. So let me use myself as an example. I told you I took 4 years off of porn, and I reintroduced porn about a year ago into my life. I have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with porn. And the way I define ambivalence is not the absence of emotions. Ambivalence is the presence of two strong conflicting emotions. The one strong conflicting emotion that I have about porn, especially knowing what it feels like to be off of it for 4 years, is that porn in so many ways is degrading. When I finish watching it, I don't feel fulfilled. I feel empty, depending on some of the porn that I watch. I see women being taken advantage of. I am conscious in many cases of what I'm watching is creating that, the downloading. It's creating worldviews of men that is not healthy for them or for the women that they create. So there's these really strong emotions that I have around pornography and that don't feel good to me. But then on this other side and this is a big part of the reason why I reintroduced it into my life, is that I haven't been highly sexually active over the past year. I don't have a committed relationship that I'm in. I have someone that I see semi-regularly, maybe once or twice a month. We have like a trusting relationship. We're intimate together. But once or twice a month isn't enough for me in terms of my sexual desires. It's not going to do it, right? And so because I don't have that many partners, because I don't sleep with her that often, I realized that I needed a little extra stimulation. And so I thought reintroducing porn in a way now with this another level of awareness around what role it could serve into my life and what kind of porn felt better than others. The certain porn that I'm drawn to is more realistic in nature. I like amateurs, women who are truly enjoying the sex they're having. They like to film it because they're exhibitionists, versus acted porn. That's just my thing, man. It's just a kink that I'm interested. That's how it works for me. No judgment upon anyone else, right? Like how you experience excitement is how you experience excitement. And so I now introduce porn where I watch short clips. I'm not spending 3 to 4 hours. There were times back in the day, man, I would lock myself in a room on a Sunday after 2 nights of drinking. I was hungover on a Sunday afternoon, and a great way to escape that feeling of being drained energetically and anxious because the Sunday scaries, work the next day, was to just disappear and numb out for 5, 6, 7 hours. My roommates could probably attest to this. I'd be behind a door for 7, 8 hours, just disappearing. That was too much. So now I realize, okay, in my discerning stage, there's a certain kind of porn that doesn't make me feel empty inside, that I'm drawn to, that there's a little bit of an element of intimacy where a woman is truly enjoying herself. And it kind of fills in those cracks around the times where I'm not having sex. And to a certain degree, that feels good for me because I've consciously made that choice. I'm in that discerning stage and realizing what role porn plays and what doesn't. And when I find myself in a committed relationship, that relationship with porn will probably change again because I will have to have that. I will not have to. I will want to have that conversation with my partner around, does she watch? How does she feel about me watching? About the stuff that I do watch? What role does it have together? But for this stage, I've reached this place of discernment based on going through those 5 stages of like really understanding where I discovered, what messages I downloaded, where I was drifting for a long period of time, all the times I disrupted intentionally and unintentionally to arrive at this place.
It sounds like to me, Dom, that what you're in right now is a stage of conscious decision-making and consistent checking in with yourself.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like. Because when you describe the different steps of where you're at now, where you want to go, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like you're not just doing it. You go to your favorite channel, you watch your favorite porn, and then boom, and you're done. It sounds like that there is not just a one-time thing, like, oh, I've been disrupted, I ask myself one question, and then I move forward. I think it sounds like discerning to me is that constant check, that constant, looking at, why am I doing this?
You nailed it, man. Because listen, this is something that I have to maintain vigilance around for the rest of my life. And I think most men also do, but for me, the stakes are higher because I've been down the road of Sex Addicts Anonymous. I've seen what happens when my sexual compulsions are left unchecked. And by the way, a lot of the guys, when I spent 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous, we would look at each other in these moments of gratitude and say, the general public, we feel sorry for in certain respects because they haven't had to look at this stuff as deeply as we have. They don't have, most of the general public will stay stuck in drift. Like at least even through the humiliation of entering the rooms and spending the amount of money and time, through therapy and also through going to meetings. I went every Sunday morning. Some guys go 4 or 5 or 7 nights a week. The amount of commitment, we would be grateful for it because at least we could understand ourselves. Now, every time I go on and I look at porn, I'm amazed at if I were to go to a pornhub.com, which is sometimes like where I go, or xvideos.com, there's a million rabbit holes I can go down on that very first landing page. And every time I go on, I see something. I'm like, whoa, I didn't know I might be into that. Let me click on that. Like anime? What's anime? Like I've never watched anime before. What would that be? And who knows? Like if I start watching anime, that could be the next thing. So I constantly have to create these like spaces between stimulus and response. And the problem with pornography that stands in the way of discernment is that there's endless amounts of stimuli, and the people who are architecting the porn websites are geniuses at creating stimulation points for you based on like your history or based on like the history of all the people that have been on it to know how to captivate you, to go down one rabbit hole. And every click, like you're just one click away from going down that hole in a way where it's really difficult to come back from.
Yeah.
So the space that I constantly have to create keeps me from a place of ending up in a state of compulsion and drift.
Right. I think that's whether you've gone to Sex Addiction Anonymous. Did I get that right?
Sex Addicts Anonymous.
Sex Addicts Anonymous. Okay. Whether you've gone through that and you're conscious that like, hey, like this could go down a different path. If you're just like normal guy out there, I think these are really healthy things to be asking. Yeah. Right. And I think for me, when I think about discernment for myself, I think 2 things. Number 1 is, can I discern what is real and what is not real?
Yeah.
Right. At the most basic level. Can I discern that like this porn that I'm looking at shouldn't be setting a new worldview for me? This isn't an expectation that I have to meet or I think that she should meet or even that my girlfriend or somebody else might enjoy. Yeah. Right? It's simply, it is entertainment for that purpose only, not real world, right? If I go watch a Marvel superhero movie, I'm not expecting to gain spidey senses, right? And I got to look at porn in the exact same way. So it's the discernment for me of what's reality versus what is not, and am I forming any new life views based on that? Totally. Yeah. And then the second thing I think for me, and this is on a more personal side, is finding space. You mentioned that space in between stimulus and response is like, why am I doing this? And so I've found myself more recently, before if I'm working from home and something's going on and all of a sudden like, my dick's hard, yeah. Now what?
Yeah.
I just give it a quick pause and like, why am I doing this? Am I working through a problem right now that I don't want to be working through? Am I bored? Am I upset with my girlfriend, so I want to do this? Do I just want to explore? Yeah. There's a million reasons. When I ask myself why, because then I have the opportunity to understand what it is, discern whether that's okay or not, and move forward. Yeah. And I will say that probably 95% of the time when I ask myself that question of like, why am I masturbating? I continue to go on and masturbate. Yeah. There's been a few times where I'm like, nope, like I should be doing the work right now, and this is an escape. So I'm going to continue down this path of not masturbating, which, by the way, very difficult to do. But I think for me, that's the discerning part. And there's probably a lot of areas in our lives, whether it's sex related or not, that we could take that discerning element into our lives, ask ourselves a quick question that would get us into that state.
No question. And so the challenge, I think the primary adversary to discernment is drift, right? So discernment is not a permanent position, as you pointed out before. It's a place that you can arrive at, and then you can default back to drift. I've done that many times. I do that countlessly, even with the level of awareness that I now have after being in Sex Addicts Anonymous for 4 years and doing all deep amounts of introspection and running workshops. Drift is a natural state of being. The reason why is because the way that we are designed as human beings is to be energy efficient. Like our brain is 2% of our body mass and requires 25% of our energy. To be efficient, we have to develop habits and patterns. And so habits and patterns can be established that either help us or harm us. And that's where the drift comes in terms of the patterns that we develop that are no longer serving us. Then you have to go back and just be great at disrupting yourself, or someone's going to do it for you. Like it'll just happen, right? The porn will be taken from underneath your mattress. It'll be found. The stash will be found. Or, you'll end up in a place of, say, Sex Addicts Anonymous, or like you'll be in a lackluster relationship where you may love the person you're with and then go and masturbate to something else that you really want. And you have an inability to communicate. And
we don't even know in those situations. Exactly. And that's the scary part with this, is that there's that unawareness that most people are in drift on that really affects the connection and relationships that are in our lives that, if we really took a hard look, are probably the most important things in our lives.
Totally.
And so it's like almost like, why not? Why not just sit down, take a quick second? Why am I doing this? What is it for real? How is it affecting my life? Okay, cool. If you're good with all that and you feel good about it, we can all feel that to a certain extent, right? Yeah. We can all feel that core inside our chest of like, ooh, does this feel good? Does this not feel good? But oftentimes we don't listen to it. Yeah. And so if we can get to just that place, better relationships for sure.
Yeah. And that's our hope for everybody, right? That's our intention for everyone. Dude, we covered a lot in these 2 episodes. There's so much more that we haven't covered when it comes to porn. So this is going to be a conversation of many. And I really hope that we struck the balance. I feel like we did, about some of the dangers of the journey that men go through unwittingly when it comes to porn, but also the fact that porn could have a place in every man's life as long as there's a level of awareness and discernment around like what role it plays for them personally and inside the relationships that they find themselves in. Before we do like a final recap of the 5 stages, is there anything that we didn't hit, dude?
I mean, we hit 5 Ds. I feel like that's a lot.
5 Ds.
Yeah, I think there's plenty that we can go in terms of the entertainment value of porn and some of the areas that we're all thinking about when we open up the browser. But I think for a mental model, these 5 Ds for me are at least something that is not just an end game. It's not just discern, discern, discern. I mean, you mentioned the word anime earlier, right? I haven't really discovered anime yet. I might go through that whole process again of discovery and downloading and drifting and everything else. So I think that's fair, but let's definitely recap.
Okay, cool. And as you're listening to these, I'd be really curious to know, so feel free to comment on this, but what stage do you find yourself at right now? And which of these stages do you aspire to get to? Number 1, first D is the discovering stage. This is the entry point. How did you enter? What was the first discovery around pornography? Was it the analog Playboy magazine? Was it high-speed porn or something in between? And what did you start to, stage number 2, download as a result of learning, your initial learnings from porn? This is like, you're genuinely curious about learning what's out there, female form, male form, and this is where you start to form your worldview. What are the expectations about what a man is supposed to do, about what a way a woman is supposed to behave? This is like your training ground. And then the third stage is the drifting stage, where most men will spend the rest of their lives This is that hypnotic rhythm, unconscious patterns and habits of engaging with pornography in ways that you never stop to question. Escalation is a key characteristic of the drifting stage. So what you needed a year ago, times 2 this year or times 10 this year, because you get desensitized the way that drugs would desensitize you or food would desensitize you. And also another characteristic of drifting is when you become less interested in human sex, human connection, lowering motivation to have some of the difficult conversations, intimate conversations with your partner, because it's just so easy to pop on and pop off with porn. The fourth stage is the disrupting stage. This is where you break free from drift, either unintentionally, so something happening, maybe like your stash being discovered or some other outside force thrusting itself upon you, where the foundational elements are now shaken. And that can either take you one of two directions, like you can become more evolved in the conversation, or you can hide deeper into shame and secrecy, which drives you deeper into drift. Or what we really want for you is to create that intentional disruption, like maybe having a conversation with a friend about this stuff that most guys never do, or taking, say, a period off of porn and masturbation just to see like the feedback that you get around how difficult is this and what are you learning about yourself. And that final stage, the fifth and final stage, is discernment. And this is the place where like you have a true and conscious understanding of what role porn plays in your life or not and why. And then understanding how, as the context and the content of your life changes, like going from single guy to relationship guy to married guy to divorce guy, like how all of those things would change the way that porn plays a role in your life, but doing it from a conscious place and understanding that you will always fall back into a place of drift, and understanding when that happens that you can disrupt yourself to bring yourself back to a place of discernment. Did I miss anything, my man?
You got all 5 Ds. I feel more empowered. I'm going on a 10-day, no porn.
You doing it?
No masturbation. Cleanse.
Hell yes. And so we should probably do an episode on like, what did Bryan learn real time from the 10 days and the struggles, the trials, the tribulations, and maybe like what you ended up with on the other side of it.
I'm going to wear waterproof underwear for 10 days, just in case.
Please comment on where Bryan can buy a reliable pair of waterproof underwear.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.